Attitude Era podcast. We are here right now at the wrestling convention. We got a legend here, somebody that was a prominent figure in the Attitude Era, in the WWF, WWE, and a wrestler that got me in a lot of trouble when I was a kid. By my
A whole lot of
certain, you know what I mean? Things. My first question to you, Val Venis, the legend is here. How did that character, what is the origin of that character actually taking over?
You know, the origin of that character was some deep-seated, perverted, well, we won't even go with that, but it was in the head of Vince Russo.
Okay.
And so Vince Russo, I was talking politics with Vince Russo when he was bringing me up to the TV studio, and just something I've always been involved in about issues in the relationship between people in government and people in the private sector, right? So I was just, having discussions about politics with Vince Russo, but he kept looking at me, and in his mind, as I was talking politics, he was thinking, this guy looks like a porn star. And I didn't realize he was thinking that.
Yeah.
I just think I'm convincing this guy that, hey, my positions are correct, right? I didn't know he was, thinking, this guy looks like a slimeball, porn star, right? But he went to Vince with it, and Vince, I guess, really liked the idea. And the next thing I know, I'm back in Mexico City, still wrestling for CMLL at the time. At 7 o'clock in the morning in Mexico City, my phone rings, and it's Vince McMahon. And he says, hey, I'm here with Vince Russo. We have a character that we want to throw by you, and we want to see if you feel comfortable playing this character. If you don't feel comfortable playing the character, let us know, because the character won't work. We'll find something else. So originally, Vince McMahon said, okay, the character's name's Val Venis, and then he spelled out the last name. Last name is spelled V-E-N-I-S. And it kind of caught me off guard a little bit, but I was like, it's kind of odd, but okay, whatever. And he goes, now Val Venis was a former film star turned pro wrestler. Now, the first thing that popped into my head was Hulk Hogan and Jesse Ventura. They both kind of done that Hollywood type gimmick. I was like, man, that's just been done before. It's stale, In my head, I'm thinking this. And as I'm thinking this, Vince McMahon says, actually, Val Venis was a former adult film star turned pro wrestler. And just like that, I was like, oh, yes, 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 yes! And I said, twist my arm a little more. And of course, Vince, being the businessman that he is, he says, just hold on, think about it for 24 hours. If you still feel like you feel comfortable playing this, give us a call back, let us know. So 24 hours later, I called him up and said, I'm in, let's do this. And that's literally how it went from a little perverted seed deep in the mind of Vince Russo to a deep perverted seed in the mind of Vince McMahon, and poof, Val Venis was born.
So when you see the character and you play it, that's an interesting story, because in my mind watching it, I'm like, I know this is what Val Venis wanted to do since the beginning. Now, my next question for you is...
I just didn't think that would be allowed on TV. So when they said this is what we want to do, I'm like, well, okay.
Yeah. So my next question is the Hello Ladies, because I feel like that was like the transition of when everybody was like, yeah, this character is one of those characters.
Absolutely.
When did you feel like that got over? Like, because that catchphrases are a big thing in wrestling, and that just became like the signature.
Yeah, it did. It was totally by accident. The very first vignette, do you recall those vignettes that were leading up to my debut? So the very first vignette that we filmed, I was in the shower, and the very first line on the script was "Hello, ladies," and then start cutting the promo. So we said "Hello, ladies," cut the promo, and then when we watched it back on the monitor, just that line, "Hello, ladies," kind of stood out, and I remember thinking, "Hello, ladies," we could just use that at the beginning of every vignette. We still didn't know we were going to do jokes out in the ring with it. I just figured this would be a good start for every of the vignettes that we're recording.
Yeah.
So we added it to the beginning of every vignette. It was always the same thing. Hello, ladies. Yeah. And then of course on our debut, it was literally like, hey, we're going to take that "Hello, ladies" and follow it up with a joke that was designed, and it had, this was Vince McMahon's parameters, right? He says, these jokes have to be carefully crafted so that adults completely get it, and the kids are going, what are mommy and daddy laughing at?
Yeah.
And I think we did a pretty good job coming up with the jokes, manufactured like that. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And it was a great character for the time, for being in the Attitude Era, like the character was there. Hello Ladies, you also had the towel. How did the towel become a thing and part of your character?
Well, that was another thing. That very first vignette, when I got out of the shower, I took the towel off, wrapped it around my waist, and we were talking about it afterwards. And when we're trying to think of something to wear down to the ring, at first I just wasn't going to wear anything other than just my trunks and boots and pads. And nobody's ever worn a towel down to the ring. It's already in my vignettes. It makes sense. And we said, let's give it a shot. And as soon as I wrapped it on, and then I envisioned myself for the first time walking down to the ring, and I'm like, oh yeah, this thing's perfect. We don't need anything else special. We don't need, razzle dazzle, shiny things or bright lights. Just the towel around the waist and just look as slimy as I possibly can. And it's perfect, right? I mean,
really
no
is.
one's done that before.
No.
And that's what really, going back to that very first phone call down in Mexico when he said, film star, and I thought Hulk Hogan, Jesse Ventura. Well, no one's worn a towel down to the ring. So from that phone call to the towel around the waist and the hello ladies and the double innuendo joke going on, I think we created a character that has never been done before, or not even come close to it. I don't even remember another character who's even close to that.
Clearly
So
a one-of-one.
I think the closest he could get to that was Rick Rude,
Yeah.
who, with a hip
Travis and
swivel
Rick.
was similar, but let's face it, he had a completely different
Yeah.
MO
Yeah.
than the big Valboski did.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He did not have a
Did
towel.
not have a towel. Did not have a towel.
So,
But
Val,
he
with
was a
your-
badass wrestler. That's for
Oh,
sure.
yeah,
He was
absolutely.
a badass wrestler.
That was kind of like the preview to what was
Yes,
going to go.
yes, that man could have been my daddy.
So being with your character, it led you into a lot of awesome storylines, mainly which included you sleeping with the wife or partner of someone else. One of them included someone trying to castrate you because you slept with their wife. What was your favorite storyline, or the craziest, let's say?
I'd say the craziest one was with Kai and Tai and the samurai sword and the choppy the pee-pee. To me, in my view, that storyline was just continuing the nature of Val Venis doing something on WWE programming, or WWF at the time, programming that has never been done before. And I think that character really encapsulated that idea that it was unique and it was new and it was fresh. Going into that storyline where we ended up with me chained to a water pipe above my head, my junk on a chopping block, and a samurai sword in the air, and John Wayne Bobbitt flipping out the lights at the very last second, it made what became the greatest cliffhanger in television history.
We still don't know what happened.
Everybody was like, did he get it chopped off or not? Who flipped the lights out? You had to wait till next week to figure it out. Biggest cliffhanger in history, in television history.
Were there any storylines that were too crazy that didn't make, that they were like, they might have been going through and they're like, nah, it's too crazy even for Val?
It wouldn't surprise me if there was, but when I say they, I'm saying Vince McMahon and Vince Russo would not come to me until they had something in stone that they wanted to do. And then we would add all the nuances to it and all that. So they may have, come up with some stuff. I'm sure Vince Russo was trying to push the envelope off the cliff a few times, and Vince was like, nah, not that far. I'm sure that happened several times. But as far as what was presented to me, you could tell it was envelope pushing, but there was always those governors on it to make sure that it didn't go over the line,
My next question for you is, watching it, this was one of my favorite moments, and I just want to know, was this, and we had the Godfather when I showed him, we didn't ask him, so you'll be the first to answer this. Was it a time when you was like, yo, being that I have this character and he has that character, we have to work together at some point? Because when I seen that actually happen, I'm like, this is the best. It's the best episode on Raw.
Oh yeah, I always had that inkling that Godfather and I are good friends to begin with, and so Godfather and I get along quite a bit, and there was always that inkling like we should do something, and eventually we did get together as a tag team for a short period of time. We were supposed to be supply and demand.
Yeah.
It was a great.
Fire name.
It was a fire.
Super
name.
fun.
It was really, really good. Unfortunately, it didn't have a lot of legs to it at the time. There just wasn't enough. The writers at that point in time, the writers that could write well for those two characters left. Basically, we were left with a different style of writing in the background. So, in my view, it was just something that we just didn't have the manpower behind us to do the writing for us, and really create new storylines for that tag team. I think we could have done I think we could have got a good few years run out of that for sure.
Val Venis, Supply and Demand is crazy.
Oh yeah.
I want to segue that into what happened after, which is right to censor. Like some people just look at that as, you know, like a character transition, but I kind of looked at it like, now reflecting back, like the world is changing and they're kind of limiting what can be on actual TV. Like when that was happening and they changed the character, did you say like, okay, I know these extreme levels are kind of bringing this to an end now because they're trying to, the Godfather, and then they're stripping Val Venis of, you know what I mean, who we really looked at him as at the beginning.
Yeah, you know, that was the that was kind of pushing back on the PTC, which was the Parental Television Council at the time. They were really hammering WWE with advertisers. I think it was Coca-Cola that pulled out because the PTC was all over Coca-Cola, saying you can't have Godfather on there doing the things he's doing, or Val Venis doing the things he's doing. So they took two of the most controversial characters and they added them to that RTC gimmick, and it was the right to censor the RTC. It was strictly to mock and, I guess you could say, de-weaponize the Parental Television Council the best we could. And I think we did a pretty good job of that. As we started to literally portray what they were doing. They were censoring WWE programming, or attempting to at the time. They kind of went away, and it was one of those things where their attacks on WWE programmers or advertisers just kind of stopped. And so that was a good thing, and it stopped because you could see that RTC also stopped. And so it was one of those things where I think they had enough of WWE making fun of them, and they just kind of left us alone at that point.
The Godfather said he hated it. How did you feel about that run with Right to Censor?
I love the Val Venis character, man. I didn't want to ever stop playing that character, you know what I mean? But, I mean, for me, the RTC character was fun because it was a little bit of a political slide to it. It just wasn't my type of politics. It was just kind of, it was something that was on one hand was actually pretty serious because they were coming after WWE advertisers, right? We got to make money here, and these guys were going after those profits. And so on one hand, it's a pretty serious business deal going on there, but on the other hand, you're going to mock these people that are attacking us, and I think that was a good way to handle it. It just wasn't my favorite way to handle it.
Sure. See, Attitude Era had a lot of dope moments like that, and someone we had on this podcast also was Rikishi, and we talked about a legendary moment, probably one of the still today most seen clips when you watch him jumping off the top of the cage.
Oh, yeah.
And who took that bump? Val Venis.
Yes, I did.
First, what was your reaction when Rikishi came up to you and said, "Look, I want to jump off a cage onto you"? What went into that moment?
You know, there were a few things. Like when I look, I mean, Rikishi and I worked together for quite a while at that point. You know, Rikishi's good. He's so damn good. And when he, you know, decided he was going to go up that top of that cage and come off there, I really didn't have any concern per se. It was more of, okay, let's do this. And it was, you know, obviously you're going to have those nerves in the back end of you, but I was pretty solid in the fact that he was professional. He's very, very good at what he does, and he proved it that night. I mean, there was no real questioning, oh, I'm going to die here tonight, you know what I mean? I knew I was going to roll on out of there just fine, but, or at least, you know, a good chance I was going to roll out of there just fine. I mean, let's face it, you got a big man coming off a real high cage, and so, I was nervous, but I was confident as well, if that makes any sense.
Do you feel like you had any in-ring moments that stood out in your illustrious career that just like, this was a favorite moment for me, whether opponent or, you know, a sequence in the ring that you just really, okay, I'm excited for the fans to view this and the receipt?
One of the most memorable moments was when Rikishi came off the cage. I mean, that's a hard one to beat. That's something that will live in the minds of fans for the rest of their lives. It was a great moment in pro wrestling. For me personally, if I were to take a look at something in my career that really stood out as one of my favorites, I got a lot of favorites, but if I had to pick one, it would have to be performing against D'Lo Brown, SummerSlam 1998, inside Madison Square Garden. The place was completely sold out. The energy was unbelievable. There was so much energy just being pushed down to the middle of that ring. Absolutely incredible event, and that's the one that really sticks out in my mind. And it's not just because of the match itself, it was the whole combination. I'm inside Madison Square Gardens, my very first pay-per-view, and killing it inside Madison Square Gardens. And I can tell because I can hear the energy. And it was just right there, as it doesn't get any more perfect than this. Inside one of the most famous arenas in the world, not just having a match, but killing it in that match. And the fans are letting me know that with the energy they're throwing back out at us. It was unbelievable. Unbelievable. Something that if you ask me to have to pinpoint a favorite, that's the one, SummerSlam 98.
Amazing. I got 2 more questions for you before we get back in there. The first one is, I mean, this is a little less professional, but you know, you got all the women. You had
I got all the
Stratus,
women.
man.
Hell yeah.
But, you know, I got to ask you, some were for TV. Which ones weren't, if any?
Well, you know,
I'm looking at we Attitude Era podcast. I had to know.
Well, I'll leave you with this one, okay? At some point in time in the future, we'll put together a best of the Val Venis others, and we'll have a competition on titling that video, and we'll release it to the public.
Oh, on Attitude Era podcast.
Absolutely.
Oh,
That's
that's
right here in the
awesome.
Attitude Era podcast.
So, my next question, and sometimes I read stuff, you know, this is cool being a fan. I get to meet you and see if it's true. Apparently, there was a time where you were supposed to form a tag team, the New Midnight Express, with Adam Copeland, Edge, legendary Edge. Is that true? Was that ever in the works?
So I heard about that after the fact. This is going, you know, a few years after apparently that all went down. I didn't know anything at the time that that's what they were going to do. So, you know, I couldn't really comment on exactly if that happened or not. I found out about it a few years later that, oh no, they were going to pair you guys together. And I'm like, really? No one ever told me that. You know what I mean? But then again, I didn't get told a lot of things. I got told, hey, you're going to do this tonight and you're wrestling this guy. And I'm like, all right, let's roll. You know, and you just start to add your little, you know, Val Venis nuances to it, and the way I went. But yeah, no one ever told me that, but I did find out about it a few years afterwards.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Val, so much. You know, I got to sneak it in. When are you getting back to WWE? When are we going to hear the Hello Ladies?
Well, you know, never say never. But right now, I just got way too much going on. I love coming to events like this. I wish I could do it on a regular basis, but events like this are only 3 or 4 times a year for me right now. I'm way too busy in Arizona. But definitely, I mean, never say never. You know, I could always end up, you know, flipping that switch and, you know, making another appearance at some point. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm not counting it out. Not counting it out.
Are you a fan of the newer product and what's going on right now?
I don't watch the new product, and it's not that I don't want to. I love pro wrestling, but just with my time schedule, man, I got no time to watch TV at all. You know, I want to catch all the UFC fights as well, but I only really catch maybe one every couple of months now, you know what I mean? No time for TV, unfortunately. I wish they could make like something that would float and you could be working, you know what I mean? And there's WWE Raw. Just if I turn my head, the screen stays right here. You know what I mean?
It's coming soon.
It's coming soon. It's coming soon.
Attitude Era podcast. Hide your girls, hide your wife. Val Venis.